Akito the Exiled is the 5 OVA series that takes place between Code Geass Season 1 and Season 2 that aired between July 16, 2012 to February 6, 2016. It has a dubious reputation among the fanbase where it seems you either love or hate it. With Roze's release, people are starting to look back at Akito with a more generous approach, realizing it wasn't as bad as they remembered. Wait, hold on a second. Weren't we supposed to talk about something else? Oh right, fan service. Not if Akito is better than you remember. I already covered that in a previous video many years ago, link in the description. Since we're on that topic, Akito is actually known for its fan service, including some famous scenes. But how horny was Akito the Exiled? Well, that's what we're going to find out in this edition of the fan service count. I'm going to first walk through all the fan service moments in Akito the Exiled and then analyze them, including going over all the stats. So let's get started. They say the best place to start is at the beginning, which makes sense to me. OVA 1, The Wyvern Arrives, was an awesome introduction to the series, minus some gripes I have about it. But what you won't see me gripe about is the fan service, because arguably there wasn't any in this OVA. Our first possible moments come during the kamikaze operation. You can see Sophie working on a computer, monitoring all the pilots. Her outfit is open at the top, revealing some cleavage, and we see her impressive bust bounce when she tells Joe to inject steroids into those soldiers. This is a nothing burger. It's a little cleavage and the outfit is not out of place for the setting, so I'm not counting this or other moments like this from later on, but I will point them out throughout the video. The next possible moments could be any time during that party to celebrate the recent battle, but these are just normal dresses, not presented in any overly erotic way, even though many do show quite a bit of skin, so I'm not going to count any of these. Then there's a possible moment during the scene where Akito and Layla prevent Ryo, Yukia, and Aino from capturing General Smilus. Aino wears a modest outfit that has a small opening at the top, revealing some cleavage, which you can clearly see here as Layla restrains her. But again, this is so minor.
Very poor choice of words.
I mean inconsequential, so I won't count that either. The OVA ends with Shin killing Manfredi and Layla and Akito talking about stuff at the graves of his fallen comrades. Our first fan service moment is this image from the credits of Sophie Randall. In this case, it isn't the outfit, but rather how it's presented, and that's why I'm counting it. To be fair, it's highly debatable, and I'm sure many of you won't agree. Then we go to the preview of OVA 2 that has two more fan service moments. A close-up of Aino's chest as she puts on the W0 uniform, and then this suggestive shot of Layla putting on the standard pilot uniform. After OVA 1, we only have 3 moments, which lasted a total of 9 seconds. By the way, before we continue, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. This video is a part of a larger series analyzing the fan service in Code Geass as part of my journey to learn if Roze is the exception or the rule. So make sure you don't miss the updates for future videos just like this. Plus, the continual support allows me to make videos just like this. Okay, e-begging is over, let's move on to OVA 2, The Wyvern Divided. Just like in OVA 1, we get another early scene with Sophie wearing her wonderful outfit, and just like before, I'm not gonna count this. After Yukia and Ryo tease Aino a little bit, we go to Klaus and Hamel. If you look at the wall, you can see some interesting posters. Originally, I was gonna count this as fan service, but decided against it for a few reasons. 1, it's mostly covered by Hamel in this scene. 2, its purpose is to help further characterize Klaus, and 3, I find it more amusing than erotic. The first fan service moment I will count occurs after Yukia hacks the security camera and the 3 of them leave their room. Aino later on bends over to look at the camera, and of course we get a point of view shot from that same camera. This includes a brief cleavage shot of Aino. Skipping ahead quite a bit, after Layla gathers up all the runaways, we then see Suzaku and Lelouch traveling to the EU, and then of course the most famous scene in Akito the Exiled occurs. You know which one I'm talking about. Before going over that, I need to point out that we do get another moment with Sophie that again won't be counted. Anyways, it's time for possibly the greatest fan service scene in anime history, where Layla puts on the Nightmare Frame pilot suit. By the way, if you pause at the right moment, you can see Layla completely topless aside from her tipples. Because YouTube sucks, I of course can't show you this, so you'll have to watch it on your own. I love how the scene shows how the pilot suit works while demonstrating another reason why Layla might be the best girl in Code Geass besides her kind and caring nature. I will resume my analysis of this scene later on because now we have to address the Alexander in the room. Here's a question that I have been contemplating for months. Do the moments where Ayano and Layla wear those pilot suits count as fan service? You could argue yes, because they are skin tight and leave little to the imagination. They of course make sure you don't forget that. On the other hand, everyone wears the same skin tight uniforms and everyone gets the same front view Nightmare Frame angles. There's even some fan service moments with Akito and Ryo in this OVA, and the creators thankfully showed some restraint here by not making the cockpits of the Alexanders similar to the Gurren Mark II. And let's be honest, it wouldn't have made any sense if they did do that, so I'm glad they realized that. Now, back to the angles. The only reason why it becomes somewhat erotic is because Layla and Ayano are well endowed. To prove my point, Jean is quite the opposite and wears a skin-tight pilot uniform, and none of her scenes wearing that uniform with a front view would count as fan service. To be consistent with my Roze video, I don't want to punish Ayano and Layla for just being busty, and the pilot uniforms don't show off any skin. Although you could argue these uniforms are similar to the straitjackets, but obviously the use of them was way less depraved. So I will split the difference and only count moments where they went a little too far with showing off Ayano and Layla in their uniforms. I did count a scene with Colin, Cornelia, and Natalia in the Roze video, so it's only fair. I will apply this same standard with the other OVAs where we get any depictions of Ayano or Layla wearing the skin-tight pilot uniforms. I recognize that much of this is subjective, and many of you are not going to agree with me, which is awesome. So now let's go through these moments to determine if they are fan service or not. First of all, I'm not going to count any moments of Ayano or Layla in the rocket itself or during the initial landing. This one of Layla is a yes for me because of the emphasis of her bust plus the boob jiggle. This one for Layla is a no for me. This next one of Ayano is debatable, but I'll count it just to have one close up. These next two of Layla are a negative, and not only are they a negative, but Layla was quite adorable in these scenes. The next Ayano one is innocent enough, and I like how they shifted the angles here. This next close-up of Layla is really pushing it, so I decide to count it. These next two moments of Layla are quite tame, so not gonna count them. This zoom in of Ayano is a bit excessive, but it's brief and hard to see, so I won't count it. Here's a friendly reminder that once again, I'm not going to count either of these moments showing off Sophie's bust. Then we have Ayano looking terrified here, so definitely not. She almost throws up in this moment, so again, definitely not. Because the rest of the members also get the same treatment as Ayano walking here, I'm not going to count that butt shot. This moment of Layla is too zoomed out to show off anything, so that's a no. After the battle, we get a scene where Ayano and Yukia reflect on what transpired. During this, they zoom in on Ayano's butt, so you better believe that's going to count, and arguably this might have been the only fan service scene to add to the counter, but of course, I split the difference like I said before. The next scene of Layla is also going to count because of that amazing side shot, and that's the end of OVA 2. We're 2 OVAs down, and the total is how much? That's it? Only 10? Damn, I guess the fan service isn't as excessive as I remembered. Anyways, on to OVA 3. OVA 3, The Bright brightness falls when compared to OVA 2 does pick up things quite a bit in the fan service department, but not to the same extent that film 3 did for Roze of the Recapture. The problem here is that for some reason they decided to have Ayano open the top of her uniform to show off lots of cleavage. Ayano is 15 here, so I'm going to count every moment of this except for a few exceptions, all off spite for this terrible decision. Oh, and I'm not going to count the depictions of Layla in her uniform except for when they overdo it. Like before, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, now let's tally up those Ayano cleavage shots and Layla's moments from this early part of the OVA. We got this one of Ayano getting upset that they've been stuck at the Europia Army Garrison former Warsaw Sports Stadium for over a month. I hope to God I never have to say that again. I count this one of Ayano looking at a dress, and later on when she runs to grab Layla as the same moment. Then, Layla bends over to look at the merchandise while showing us the other merchandise, so of course that counts. Then Ayano again this time shows off a dress to Yukiya. By the way, she's gonna need some ice after that burn.
Hey, this would look pretty on you, Yukiya.
Probably better than it would on you.
He got you there, friend.
Since Layla's tag has no money on it, they go back to figure out what's going on. During that scene, Layla bends over, so of course that will count. My goodness, what a scene. Then Ayano comments on this, and later on smiles as Ryo breaks the monitor. Both these moments will count and be tallied as the same one. Then there's this moment of Ayano just standing there after they encounter the old ladies, which of course counts. Then we had the scene later on of her commenting that old ladies don't seem to like her. Then we get to the first two nude scenes, maybe the third if you count Layla changing in OVA 2. Anyways, we see the old ladies ripping off Ayano's clothes. Pausing at the right moment reveals quite a bit. Again, YouTube sucks, so I won't show you this in the video, and I wouldn't do it anyways because Ayano is 15.
What's the matter with you?
Anyways, it's now Layla's turn to get undressed, where we once again see her bare butt, but at least the old ladies gently change her clothing, unlike their aggressive approach for Ayano. No front shots of her this time, since they already gave that to us in OVA 2. Now what's absolutely insane is that that's the extent to the most of the fan service in this OVA. It gets most of it out of the way early on, since Ayano's new outfit doesn't show as much cleavage when compared to opening her pilot uniform. I'm not going to count any of those scenes against her. Also, the scenes themselves are far from erotic, with no strange angles, zoom-ins, and so forth. We then go back to Klaus in Castle Weisenwolf, where once again we see the posters of the women, and again I'm not going to count them for the same reason as before, even though this time Hamill is not blocking them. I was debating on adding it, but ultimately chose not to. To find our next moment, we gotta move quite ahead in the story to the last night the W0 spent with the gypsies. Ayano does that famous boob jiggle when she dances. Not a fan service moment, but I always appreciate the dance segment between Layla and Akito. We travel back to Castle Weisenwolf for more Sophie cleavage, and again, not gonna count that, and we get even more Sophie towards the end, which still doesn't count, and that's it for OVA 3. Despite it only having 11 moments, it's still more than double the meter from OVA 2, which really demonstrates how there wasn't much fan service in this anime to begin with. Now let's move on to OVA 4. So at the start of OVA 4, Memories of Hatred, we see all the W0 members preparing to launch into space. Again, not going to count this perspective of Sophie who's monitoring this. During the battle against the drones and Ashley on the Ark fleet, we get some perspectives of Ayano in her nightmare frame. I'm going to count this one because it's a close-up that includes a boob bounce. This one is fine. This next one is harmless, as she's just showing concern for Akito. This next one of Ayano is debatable, but given the context, I won't count it. Then we gotta skip ahead quite a bit to the negotiation scene between Shin Hyuga and Layla. After the W0 members re-emerge, we get another scene of Sophie that again, I won't count. Then later on, Ryo, Yuki, and Ayano talk before they temporarily part ways. We get several perspectives of Ayano here. Even though this is a wholesome some moment. Given the angles of Aino here, I will count this one. But to be fair, I will only increment the meter once, and that'll include all the different moments from that scene. I won't count Aino's reaction to the Euro-Britannians shooting down Yukia from the sky in the epilogue of OVA 4. Talk about going downhill from OVA 3, since there were only 2 debatable fan service moments. But let's see what happens in OVA 5. Will it get worse or be about the same? OVA 5, Two Beloved Ones, picks up right after the epilogue from OVA 4. Akito is able to rescue Yukia thanks to the brain raid system. Yukia goes into surgery, Ashley joins the W0 to fight Shin, and Anna finishes the Alexander Liberté. Then we get to the nude scene with Jean Ro, which now has become problematic thanks to that stupid retcon, and I'll get to that later, but that specific retcon won't be included in determining if that entire nude scene was fan service. So while on that topic, is her nude scene fan service or not? Well, let's go over the reasons why it could be. It's a nude scene, so by its nature, there's going to be some erotic elements to it. When Jean goes for her gun, the angle is extremely suggestive. They could have just zoomed in on her midsection, but instead they opted to show you everything. And we see Jean completely nude from the front and the back. And now for the reasons why I don't think it's fan service. First, let's look at the context of this scene. Ashley can only talk to Jean privately because he's the enemy. He obviously can't approach her in public, so his appearance in her private chambers makes sense. It just happens to be she was showering at the time. Kinda like that scene with Halle Linder and Mello in Death Note. I guess this is just a trope in anime. Anyways, the tone is melancholy since Ashley is making her realize that her lover has lost his ways and she might even need to fight him. This is the first of 2 parts where Jean has been confronted with this reality. The tone isn't happy or erotic, which you can say applies to the scene itself. There's no sexual tension between Ashley and Jean isn't a conventionally attractive character. She's thin, has odd curly hair, no cake, and a small bust. I don't think they showed her off like this to give you a stiffy, although I personally find her body type attractive, but based on the designs for most female characters in this IP, that's not what most viewers find to be attractive. Again, proving my point. Beyond her not being conventionally attractive, the scene itself doesn't escalate into anything possibly erotic. Ashley doesn't fall on her, no one comments that she's naked, and so forth. It even showcases how close Ashley and Jean are if she doesn't seem to care that he sees her naked. It's probably something that happened all the time when they were growing up. Now you can find many shower scenes like this from other anime, including the aforementioned Death Note, but one key difference between many of those scenes and this one is the presentation. Many of them show the female characters rubbing their bodies as they clean themselves in a somewhat erotic way as they enjoy the shower, or extremely suggestive angles. You either get a full nude shot or an erotic zoom in. Many of these scenes also have the characters undressing before they get into the shower. Because YouTube sucks, again, I can't show you the full context of these scenes, so you'll have to take my word for it, but I listed the names of the anime shown here, and we'll have a complete list of other anime like it in the description below. You know, for the men of culture out there. Anyways, by comparison, there's one suggestive angle of Jean when she grabs the gun, but when she leans against the shower, they don't show her behind like other anime. There's no dynamic zoom in or zoom out from that perspective. We don't see her rubbing her body in a sexual manner or making any possible erotic expressions while doing it, and there's no scene of her undressing before taking the shower. They don't even really focus too heavily on the fact that she's nude to begin with. So in a surprise twist, I'm not counting this scene as fan service. Instead, it's a great example of having a nude scene that doesn't exist for fan service. A rarity for this IP. The scene is more like Lelouch moping in the shower in R1 episode 13 than Colin's shower scene in R1 episode 3. Now let's skip ahead to after Yukia wakes up from the surgery. Aino then helps him into a pilot uniform and they head out to the hangar. I'm not going to count this one shot of both their butts. Let's skip ahead even further to when Aino confronts Sean by Apollo's chariot. She hopes to convince her to stop this madness. During the confrontation, there's one zoom out of Jean where you can see her backside. Even though her cake is rather lacking, I'll still count this one regardless. After Akito and Shin transport to another another dimension to view their past memories, we see several shots of Sophie analyzing and explaining the phenomenon. Of course, none of these moments will be counted. After Layla activates her Geass, we get this perspective of Aino, which is debatable fan service, but I'm not going to count it given the context of the scene. Then we gotta skip even further ahead towards the later part of the battle between Shin and Akito, where we again see Aino affected by Geass. This time it's Layla's, so she's covered by a blue overlay as opposed to a red one. And while there is a boob bounce here, it's cancelled by the context of the scene, and just like the previous moment with Aino, this one is also brief. For our last moment, we have to go all the way to the end, where the W0 reunites with the gypsies. We get a close-up of Aino in her dancing gypsy dress, which I will count. Afterwards, Layla and Akito cement themselves as a couple with that famous kiss. Then the OVA and Akito the Exiled ends with Rollo coming to rescue both Suzaku and Lelouch. So how horny was Akito the Exiled? Well, let's get to the numbers. I counted 25 moments of fan service in Akito the Exiled. With 5 OVAs, that comes to exactly an average of 5 moments per each OVA. OVA 5 and OVA 4 had the smallest number of fan service moments at 2 apiece, where OVA 3 had the most at 11. Here's the rest of the breakdown, including if the OVAs were broken into small chunks. That way you get a better perspective of the distribution of the fan service within this anime. And as you can see, it was quite top heavy, pun intended. While on that topic, there was about 6 minutes of fan service moments before I cut it down for the video. The total runtime of all OVAs combined is 4 hours and 51 minutes, or 291 minutes. That averages to about 1 moment every 48 minutes, which translates to about 2% of the entire anime's runtime. Just for some perspective, you had to wait almost 2 hours before you get to Layla's changing scene, which is the first major fan service scene in the entire anime. Of all the female characters in the story, only 4 had, in my opinion, legit fan service scenes, those being Layla, Aino, Sophie, and Jeon. Aino comes in first place with 15 moments, Layla in second place with 8, and Jeon and Sophie are tied in last place with 1 moment apiece. There were many moments I didn't count, but just for fun, if I had included them, that would have been an additional 50 moments, bringing the total to 75. Even counting those scenes only adds another 10 minutes of fan service in the anime, which is a little more than 5% of the anime's total runtime. 50 of those 75 moments are the characters wearing the pilot uniforms, which only happens in select parts of the anime, which again shows just how the fan service was top heavy in nature and how little of it was actually present. Akito the Exiled had 3 full nude scenes where only 1 showed everything. There's also 1 partial nude scene if you count Layla changing in OVA 2. For the best fan service moment, it's a tie between Layla's changing scene in OVA 2 and Aino's dancing scene in OVA 3. And for the worst fan service moment, well, that has to go to Aino in OVA 3, where for some reason she had to open the top of her pilot uniform. What's crazy about all of this is that despite the discourse surrounding the rampant fan service in this anime, it turns out there wasn't much to begin with, which I guess could be said about the discourse surrounding this anime in general, which is a shame. I think this happened because of the quality of the fan service scenes within that small time frame. I get the impression that based on the reception for Roze of Recapture and this anime, that the real reason why people don't like Akito is not because of the characters, the plot, the Geass, etc., but rather because there wasn't much fan service. I guess they prefer less story, less characterization, and more skin. We live in a very sad timeline. Anyways, I want to praise the people behind this series for showing restraint and only using fan service when appropriate. This anime is one of the best examples of quality fan service over quantity fan service that I've seen in many other anime, including this abomination. They didn't show much skin outside of the 4 nude scenes. Even then, there was nothing depraved about any of those depictions. Most of the fan service or possible fan service moments don't even last long, and they brilliantly handle the cleavage with the female characters. They had Sophie open the top of her outfit, but it wasn't too excessive and contextually made sense. The same applies to Aino, aside from whatever they were thinking in OVA 3. They didn't even sexualize Aino too much in the gypsy outfit, which did surprise me. And even though the main characters wore skin-tight pilot uniforms, they didn't overly emphasize the bust of the female characters like they have done in so many other mecha anime. They even had a non-erotic nude scene, something you can argue didn't exist even in the original anime. They also didn't have any fan service without any context, meaning they didn't just show off the skin and or bust of the female characters for no reason, other than to give you a stiffy of course, aside from the many Aino moments where she has her uniform open. Putting that aside for the moment, let's just focus on the fact that everyone had to wear the same skin-tight uniforms, so obviously the female character's butt or bust would stand out in certain scenes. Everyone in the W0 wears the same standard uniform, but Aino prefers to wear a slight variation of it, which has some cleavage. The same applied to gypsy outfits. Everyone has to wear them while working with the old ladies, and they also have an alternative version for the night scenes. Other than that, the rest of the fan service is just the characters changing. So obviously if they're going to show that, you're going to see some things. I really appreciate this mature approach for creating the fan service. I'm going to dive deeper into this in a future video, but here's a preview. Look at how they showed Layla sleeping in this OVA versus Sakuya in Roze of the Recapture. That's the best way to summarize the key difference between these two anime. Anyways, besides context, many fan service moments also serve the role of visual storytelling. It's similar to sex position from Game of Thrones, only without the sex and containing some exposition. I don't think there's an official term for this, so I'll just invent one. Service telling. Such examples include Layla showing us how the pilot uniforms work, the reactions of Layla and Aino during the changing scene, which has multiple layers of meaning, Aino dancing in the gypsy outfit, or even the posters on Klaus's wall, which I didn't count, but arguably were fan service. I also like the equality in this anime. All the pilots wear the same uniforms and have the same nightmare frame angles, and everyone wore revealing gypsy outfits. Heck, towards the end of OVA 5, Shin had quite a fun angle, probably worse than all the female characters put together. We even see Akito's, Yukiya's, and Ryo's bakery. And while not necessarily a good thing in the way it was done, but Yukiya and Ryo are sexualized almost as much as Aino and Layla. The reason why I say the way it was done, because I was not a fan of the groping, since Ryo is 17 and these women are probably at least 60 years old. And even when it became consensual, it was still really uncomfortable to watch at times. Besides this one application of equality within the anime, I like the approach overall because it makes the fan service stand out less and contextually make more sense, as I said earlier. Besides the groping scenes with Ryo, the only other controversial moment is Junro's nude scene. Not because it's bad or too much, rather they decided to reveal that she's 15 years old in Geass Lost Stories, thereby making Shin Hyuga a PDF file, which ruins his redemption arc and makes the scene now extremely uncomfortable to watch. At least of Aino's changing scene, you just see one angle of her bottom with her covering the rest of her assets. But as I said before, if you pause at the right moment, you can see quite a lot from that zoomed out angle. I wish it didn't exist, but it's less offensive than Jun's nude scene and considerably much shorter. And while on that topic, technically Layla has several nude scenes and she's only 17 years old. For the life of me, I don't know why they did this. Nothing would be dramatically different if all the characters were at least 18 years old and up. There's no high school elements in this anime. I guess that's a limitation you have to deal with when making an anime in this IP. But back to the retcon. With all the good decisions surrounding this anime, I have to ask, what the were they thinking with this? Especially when most people who watched the series, myself included, figured Jean was at least 20 years old given how she acts and is presented in this anime. A blight for sure, and something I don't recognize because of how stupid it is. Going forward in my headcanon, which is the rational, logical perspective, Jean is 22 years old. So, putting that bullshit aside, was Akito the Exiled as horny as you remember? Well, from the stats alone, not really, and from the scenes alone, also not really. I think it's commendable, and it demonstrates the best way to incorporate fan service into an anime. The more I rewatch this anime, the more I realize how many things they did well in this story, and we can add the fan service to that list. Now, I mentioned before I tallied up all the fan service scenes from Roze the Recapture, and you can watch that video right here.